Hi, I'm Vishnu. I'm the CEO of Ente, and you're listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker, and today we have episode 448 for September 29th, 2025. And we've got a great interview today with the founder and CEO of Ente, that's E-N-T-E. And I first learned about these guys when I found their two-factor authentication app. It's just called Ente Auth. But turns out that wasn't their main product. They actually started with a Photos app, which is pretty darn cool. And the reason I was really interested to talk to Vishnu about this was that they really designed it for privacy from the get-go. And so I kind of wanted to highlight it as an example of private by design, because it's really important when you're doing privacy and security for that matter, to build it in from the get-go, from day one. It's a lot harder to retrofit security and privacy after the fact. And you're also much more likely to miss something. So what Ente is doing here is the sort of approach we really need for all application developers to take. As a software engineer, to me, this would be a point of pride to design my application with these thoughts and these features built in from the start. It's a type of craftsmanship. It's like the difference between buying like a credenza where the back has got really cheap wood on it because they figure it's going to be against the wall, no one's ever going to see it, or where the underside of furniture is built out of really cheap materials and crappy looking stuff because they figured, no one's ever going to turn it over. Somebody who actually cares about what they're doing makes it look good all over. And maybe that's not the proper analogy here, but I think you get where I'm going with this. As a software engineer, to me, that just makes sense. Like, I wouldn't want to do it any other way. But in today's world, a lot of these companies obviously are just trying to make money as quickly as possible. And so the quicker you can get something out, the better. And oftentimes security is something people won't pay for or don't know to pay for or don't know how to recognize enough to pay for. So there's not an obvious line drawn between spending engineering time and resources to build in security into a product that's going to mean more revenue for that product when people buy it. And for privacy, that's a whole different thing. For privacy, there's that aspect to it as well. But let's face it, the reason there's not privacy by design on a lot of the products that we use is because our data is worth a lot of money. There's a specific conflict of interest to including privacy in products. So it's great when we finally see somebody take the time to do it right in the first place and then just charge a reasonable price for their service. Now, another feature that this particular Ente product we're going to talk about today has, and something I really wish I would see in more other applications, is data portability. A lot of these apps, on purpose, again, will collect a lot of your data that you give it freely, documents, photos, things like that, and make it hard for you to move those cleanly to another app or service. The ability to export from one app and import to a different app. It's a dark pattern that we call the Roach Motel pattern. It's really easy to check in. It's really hard to check out. But where this also bites you is the fact that it makes it difficult to back up a copy of your data in a way that's useful. So again, I think it's great when we finally find products that do things what I consider certainly the right way. So we're going to talk about Ente Photos today as an exemplar of what I think all apps should be doing. So real quick, before we get into our interview, there are a few lingo things I want to go over. We talk about some terms and don't really define them as we go. I've talked about some of these in the past, but just to make sure we're on the same page, we talk about SaaS, and that is not SaaS, but SaaS, software as a service. We're used to this. We don't think about it in these terms, but that's the marketing term for this. When you're using things like Google Docs or, a calendar app through your web browser, these are things you might run a dedicated app for, but they're actually running in the cloud somewhere out on the internet on someone else's computer and just kind of presented to you through your web browser. We also talk about open source software, but Vishnu is careful to talk about the difference between open source and source available. And open source is used a little bit too loosely. what's usually meant about open source is that open source code has the source code, the actual instructions that are used to compile the software into the application that you eventually use. You can view that. You can actually see what the engineer wrote. So you can see exactly what that software is doing and what it's not doing. That is technically open source. But the purists will say that so far all we really talked about is source available, which means that it's available to view but not to modify, let's say. Real open source projects allow third parties to submit changes directly to the code. Other coders to say, here's a cool feature I want to add, or here's a bug I want to fix. And it's available to actually take third-party input. So that is the difference between the terms open source and source available. Since we are talking about photos, we talked a little bit about photo metadata. And your camera or your phone, acting as a camera, will often attach or embed metadata with your photos. And it's usually in the format called EXIF, E-X-I-F. And I forget what that stands for, but it's metadata around photos. It's shutter speed, aperture, whether or not a flash was used. Often today it will include your GPS location, things like that. And then we also talk about UX or user experience. We talk about the CLI, that's the command line interface. So it's a text-based terminal window instead of a graphical user interface or a GUI or a GUI. So there you go. There's some terms that we throw around and didn't really define. I wanted to make sure that you had them in your head when we get to them in the interview. Now, let's get to our interview with Vishnu from Ente. Vishnu is the founder and CEO of Ente, free and open source, end-to-end encrypted platform for photos and more. He's also a father, a programmer, and an ex-Google engineer. Welcome to the show, Vishnu.
Thanks, Gary. It's great to be here.
Really looking forward to this. I know you talked with the guys at TechLore. I love those guys. And I honestly first heard about Ente, and I didn't know how to pronounce it, by the way, until I watched the TechLore one, which they made a point of. I didn't know. So good to know. It's Ente, not Ente. I always say Ente. Hey. I first heard about it through the Authenticator app, was how I first heard about it. When I searched for it, I thought, I'm like, wait, this isn't the right company, because it was, of course, your main thing is the Photos app, and that was what was on the page. So I've, of course, since learned that. But it's one of the few companies today that, that they decided to go the open source route and then make money the old fashioned way, like by charging for costs. Like, you charge for what you've got server storage and server maintenance, and like you charge enough to hopefully cover that, as opposed to, mining people's data for money. In fact, because it's open source, people can install their own copy of Ente, which I'm sure we'll probably talk about today, and run it for free if they really want to. So let's start off with, it's kind of your origin story. Why did you start Ente, and why do you care about open source software and privacy?
I guess the story begins somewhere in 2019. I was working at Google. I was in Switzerland. It was like a really nice, beautiful place, but a bit too slow for my liking. Not just the place, I think the work also. There's not much happening at Google. I guess there hasn't been much happening at Google for a while now. But I was one of those guys who was hired to practically not do anything else outside Google. So there's this concept of resting and vesting, where you just chill and you just pass time and you kind of just rack up a bit of equity. Yeah, that's a very popular term within Google. And I guess elsewhere in all big tech companies, where you're just racking up the equity without doing anything. So yes, that was basically what was happening in 2019. And I was really bored out of my mind. And this was actually that I just got married, and we had just moved to Switzerland, and we're kind of just touring around Europe, and we're clicking a lot of photos. And that is, I think, my peak usage of Google Photos at that point. And in general, I love Google Photos as a product. I think they deliver a lot of value on top of your photos. It's not just backup, right? They kind of push a lot more value. And this is the same time there is this whole internal furor in Google about their participation in this AI warfare project called Project Maven, wherein they were kind of using some models to like help Pentagon execute like drone strikes in Afghanistan. And since then they kind of backed out of the project. And recently, I think a couple of months back, they got back into AI warfare again, which is weird. But yeah, I guess that's whatever drives like stockholder value, I guess. So yeah, all of this was happening. Then it got me thinking about like, what am I doing with my data? Like, am I really in control of the outcomes that I am enabling? And see, Google is a very secure company. they take security very seriously, but it's not a privacy company. They're an ad tech company. Like whatever we provide, whatever we feed them with, it's kind of enabling outcomes that are not completely in our control. Like computer vision, for example, is like a very nascent field. and LLMs have just like popped up in the last couple of years, and computer vision is yet to, like, large vision models are yet to come up. And I am someone who's very sentimental about my photos. Like, I grew up around my photos. Like, my dad always had this wall of photos around. And I guess you can now see, like yeah, in general, there like was always been a wall of photos around, right? So I just wanted to opt out of this because I felt there is an incredible amount of information you can learn about me as a person if you just like flip through my photos. And I just wanted to opt out. So then I kind of gave up my Android phone. I like moved to like an iPhone. Like I like moved all of my data to the iCloud ecosystem. And only then did I realize that these guys, Apple just locks your data into their platform. So like I had a ThinkPad at that point, I had a Linux machine at that point, and I found it ridiculous that I couldn't browse my photos on my Linux machine. And then my wife had a Samsung device, and I could no longer share photos with her because she was on an Android ecosystem and I was on iOS. So that just broke the idea of photo sharing for me, because a huge reason why we click photos is to share, right? So that Apple kind of breaking that like really pissed me off. So then I went to Dropbox actually, because they are fairly cross-platform. So they do let you sync photos, but the experience they provide over photos is very minimal. It's more of a enterprise folder file thingy rather than a like what I was used to with Google Photos, like where there is a lot of joy that you get out of using your photos or browsing your photos. So yeah, so Dropbox was not really doing the thing. Then I tried self-hosting data at that point. I think there was Pavigo at some point that I was checking out. And then that particular DigitalOcean instance crashed at some point, and my wife was really mad that we kind of lost like a couple of days of photos. And then I realized that photos is one thing where posterity is very important. Like when I'm not around, it's important that she gets those photos, and I don't want her to go through the trouble of like self-hosting and like managing servers. And then as an engineer, I found it ridiculous that there was no other company out there kind of solving this problem. And like I said initially, like I was not really doing much at Google, so I realized that this is actually an interesting problem to just bang my head against for a couple of decades, or like for whatever. It just seemed like a very long running problem that I could keep working on. So that was it. That is kind of how Ente began. I came back home and I started building a hardware actually. I thought I'll build a piece of hardware that you could physically keep at home and your photos could kind of sync to it. And then I learned the hard way that hardware is hard to sell, like unless you are a very popular brand or unless you have like massive VC money to burn. So then we pivoted it into a SaaS cloud offering that we have right now, which is end-to-end encrypted and fully open source. So that's kind of like the origin story for Ente. And the second part of your question was about open source. Like I've kind of been a programmer for a very long time, that by discipline and by as a hobby as well. So it's like I started making websites when I was a kid in high school, and then I think 2009 is when I got my first phone, second phone, which is an Android phone. And it is like a Samsung device, which Samsung had stopped updating. And that was my first run into open source, because I realized that, hey, I should just quit complaining and I could actually just fork the repo and like build the next version for myself. And that's kind of how it started with open source. And like there is this tinkerer in me, which it really encouraged. And I found it fascinating that there is this world of like very open world where people are kind of selflessly pushing technology forward, and the benefits kind of multiply over a period of time, and kind of it's kind of exponential. And I found that aspect of it very interesting. And this is not something which is very common in other fields. Like for example, my wife is a doctor, where everything it's all so closed, right? Like you really don't share information unless you really have to pay through your nose to push anything forward. And and yeah, so compared to that, I feel as programmers, we've kind of pushed humanity forward in some way, and open source kind of had a huge role to play in it. So yeah, and like there is a general sense of gratitude, right? Because I think personally, like whatever we've built, whatever I've built as a programmer, a lot of it is based on top of other open source projects. And even in the context of Ente, like I think we are building Ente on top of like with just standing on shoulders of other giants. And so there is a gratitude, the emotional angle to it. And Ente specifically, there is this marketing angle as well in terms of establishing trust, because if you look at our repo, it's not just open source. We are not source available, right? We actually are committing live code like every day. Like I think we've crossed over like 40,000 commits. And for a company like Ente, which is coming and like say that, hey, like we'll kind of keep your photos safe, I think it's a huge ask, and it's important for us to be honest and transparent, and for this honesty and transparency to actually show, to be out there, like just to be visible to the world. So there is a trust angle as well, right? And for me personally, there's a different angle, which is again posterity, because I really want my photos to be around when I'm not around. Like I have a daughter now, so there is this personal angle to this, that I would want her to get the photos I have clicked off her through Ende. And very simple way of ensuring that is by making the project bigger than just like myself for this company that we have right now. So like even if I were to get hit by a bus like tomorrow, that kind of things will continue. Right? There are enough
Right.
contributors and this will
Yeah.
just keep going on. So that's kind of a personal angle, but I think it applies to a lot of folks who are using the app. Like Hugh's recently click photos so that you can just kind of like pass things down and like you can go back and look at things. Yeah, so open source basically gives us that advantage, so it kind of helps in ensuring posterity.
I mean, the base business model for the internet today is surveillance capitalism. You give away products for free or maybe below cost, and then you make your money off of selling people's data or maybe by getting kickbacks from ad companies who basically do that. Why did you choose a different path? There have been many companies who start off respecting people's users' privacy and then change their mind when they get VC money or maybe they get bought out. And I've gotten burned by them myself, and so I'm kind of bitter about it. How can you assure your users that even if you're committed to privacy today, that you'll remain so in the face of future changes?
Got it. So that's a loaded question, right? So I'll split them into two, right? So the first part, like in terms of building a company, I think there are like so many ways to build companies, right? I think what has happened of late, at least especially with respect to software industry, is that surveillance capitalism is kind of normalized by mostly the VCs, like in the Silicon Valley, because they're looking for like a very short-term exit, like a 100x exit. And this way of like selling consumer data is a very deterministic way of ensuring these outcomes. Right? And I think I've grown up in a world wherein I've seen, again, consumer companies, might not be internet companies, but companies that have actually provided value. And I've grown up in India, wherein there are companies that have existed for generations, like these are kind of family companies. But basically, there are companies that have been very fair to their consumers and to their employees that have lasted for a very long time. And I've kind of grown up looking up to them. And I feel that is also a deterministic game to play. It might be a longer game to play, right? But I am not really in a hurry to get anywhere. Ente is not in a hurry. So I feel it's if you deliver value, you will eventually find people to pay for it. And that's a core belief. And also then there's a personal angle, right, which I was talking about, like I'm building Ente for my family. So I am the target customer. My daughter will be a customer. So it's important that I set a tone for what the company is by doing what is best for her and like for the generations to come. So if I look at it, I think the way we're building Ente is like the most obvious way to do it, at least for the goals that we wish to accomplish, which is to actually build a wholesome company that outlives us and to actually create net positive for the world. So coming to the second part of the question, which is about assuring folks that we'll never compromise on privacy. Easy thing to do for me right now is to just assure folks on this call. But I think trust is earned over a period of time. I don't think I can just like get it by just me saying something right now. And if you follow a company's trajectory over a period of time, you actually start seeing their vision, right? And because there's a level of consistency in it. And if you look at Ente as a company, we actually fit the very typical VC narrative, which is an ex-Google engineer building an anti-Google company. But we did not raise VC money because at early stages, I do think it impacts longevity. And this is not to say that VCs are bad, right? But if you're raising money at a very early stage, you have a responsibility to return your money to investors, and they're looking at 100x return within a very short time frame. And that is not a very healthy promise for a company like Ente to keep, where, again, people are betting on Ente to outlive themselves. So that's the one angle to it. And then even if you look at other privacy companies, I think there are very few that are fully open source to the way Ente is. And we did that for, again, very selfish reasons, right? One, it again ensures longevity. And second is that trust factor, again, like even if you were to actually move away from our mission, which is just to make privacy accessible, like I think there are other folks who can just fork the project and just do as they please. And just today, we are actually working on making sure that migration across different instances of Ente is like easy. So you could just like get your data from our official instance and like spin up your own instance and like push data there. So making that seamless in some way. So yes, overall, we're trying to build Ente in a way wherein you don't really have to trust the people behind it. It's end-to-end encrypted, it's verifiable, it's externally audited, and we're open source. And so there are those things, right? And then I think on some level, you do have to trust the intent of the people who are building things, right? Building a company. There is this essay from Ken Thompson about like reflections on trusting trust, wherein he talks about supply chain attacks or sorts, like how easy it would be to inject something into the compiler, wherein it can totally mangle whatever is happening without you really realizing it. So on some level, it's important for you to have that level of trust. And I think that trust is basically earned over a period of time.
Sure. And again, I think practically speaking, it like you said, one of the key things I think you just said is you're an open source company. If for some reason you start screwing up and people don't like it, someone will fork your project and then keep doing what you were doing, right? And I think that's sort of a way that you can look at the project and say, okay, no matter what he says, I can at least take that to the bank. That if nothing else, I can always take this and do it myself, or maybe someone else could do it. Okay, a lot of cloud services claim to be private and secure. The one I always hate is when they say with military grade encryption, but most of them don't have true end to end encryption. So can you explain real quick? And we've talked about this on the show before, but from your perspective, why is end to end encryption so important? Why does it matter? And maybe how do you define it? Because it's a lot of people use that word way too loosely. And then tell us how much information does Ente collect about users? And for example, if the police came knocking on your door with a valid court order, what could you give them?
Right. So when all of these websites advertise military grade encryption, let's look at what encryption is, right? Encryption is just us saying that there is a mathematical function over which you pass data with a key as an input, and then your data comes out, and which can only be, you can kind of reverse this process only with the same key. And without the key, it's just mangled. It's just binary blobs that you can't make sense out of. So when all of these folks advertise military grade encryption, it's that on their servers, the data at rest is encrypted. Like when the data is actually resting on their servers, that is encrypted with a key, and they hold that key. So what this means is that if some, like, let's say a malicious third party, let's say hackers were able to get access to their server hard disks, what they would end up getting is this binary blobs, right? So they can't really make sense of this. But what actually this means is that the service provider itself still has the key to decrypt your data. So technically they can still access your data, and for all practical purposes, they do access the data. So that's the server-side encryption, or like what they call encryption at rest. End-to-end encryption is different in the sense that the data is encrypted before it leaves your device. So before it reaches Ente servers, or if you look at Signal, like in the context of Signal, before it actually the message leaves your device, these are encrypted with a key that only you have access to. So only when it reaches a device where the corresponding key is available, can they decrypt it. So in transit, or while it's passing through Ente servers or Signal servers, no one can really kind of get in the middle, and you can't be a man in the middle and look into it and understand what's happening. So end to end, the data is encrypted. So yeah, basically only you have the keys, only you can see your data. That is basically what end to end encryption is. And it's, again, kind of becoming privacy is a human right. So right to end-to-end encryption is also becoming a human right. And,
Absolutely.
And now in terms of data that Ente collects, in terms of personal data, we collect email addresses for signups. That's primarily because there is a subscription attached to your Photos account, and it's very important for us to tell you if your subscription expires or if data is going to be deleted and all that. But you can use any email address, right? You can use an alias service for it. That works with us. We collect IP addresses mostly to make sure we're not getting hit by random attacks, which happens more often than you might think, because we are a FOSS service and all of our server-side code is out there. So there are DOS attacks that happen very frequently. But again, so you can spoof that as well. Then there are payment details that we collect. We don't really store those payment details. Like we use Apple or Google or Stripe to collect those details. But so they store the data at their end. But we kind of, like, if you have actually purchased an account, we technically have access to what your payment. We don't have access to payment information, but we know a third party who has access to payment information. So this is it. Now, if you were to actually get a warrant or something in terms of data, all we can give are these, right? There is email address, there is your IP address, and if you have a paid account, then there is that information. Because in terms of your photos, we just have encrypted blobs, and which people can't really make sense out of.
Okay, I want to just press a little further, because we've gotten burned by this before, like with LastPass, where they said, "Oh, your vault's encrypted; it's encrypted on your side before it ever leaves," but they failed to mention, except for like the URLs, those are still there, or other parts of the metadata were unencrypted. Can you say for sure that like everything's encrypted? Like there's like the names of my photos, the sizes of my photos, the count of my photos. Can I determine any of that?
So the name of your photos, no. The name of your albums, no. Your descriptions or captions you attach to photos, no. The count of your photos, we understand, because each of these are blobs that end up on our server, because we can kind of derive this information. Like for every photo, we upload a photo and the thumbnail. So we know that if you uploaded 2 items, we can kind of half it out and figure the count. Count is basically public. Apart from that, any other metadata, like the EXIF information is encrypted. Any other metadata you might attach. Like now, for example, we now have things like
Very interesting. You've mentioned Google and Apple, and they have products for these. And of course, they're built into their various product lines. And how does Ente compare with like Google and Apple Photos apps? Like in many cases, those apps that come with the operating system have a lot of advantages over third-party apps because they usually have private APIs that maybe they could do, or maybe they have better, tighter integration with the other apps that come with the operating system. So how well does Ente integrate with the various platforms? Like, for example, if I were to take a photo using my mobile camera on my iPhone, could I have that go straight into my Ente photo album, or do I need to copy it over or, transfer? Or how well does it integrate compared to the native apps?
Right. So on Android, things are simpler in certain respects. Like, for example, we are very easily able to mimic the behavior of Google Photos. So anytime you click a photo, we automatically run in the background and back it up. And we run machine learning in the background to categorize, curate, and to actually make your item searchable. The only experience that breaks is that the Google camera on Pixel devices, it's hard linked to Google Photos. So if you actually click a photo and if you have to preview it, and if you tap on the preview button, if you uninstall Google Photos, you just can't preview. Like if you disable Google Photos, you just can't preview photos. So there's a hard link there if you're using Google Camera, but that's about it. Now, if you come to iOS, things are a lot more interesting because Apple does not provide APIs. They use a background sync, right? So we have hacks in place, both in terms of engineering and in terms of UX. Like in terms of engineering, for example, we send periodic push notifications to devices. These are silent pushes, which wakes up the device and we get like 30 seconds to do a background sync. So we do that. And then there are certain other background sync APIs we hook onto, which give us slightly more than 30 seconds to sync. And it's very important to kill your app very quickly because if you start executing too much in the background, Apple penalizes for you for it. And it'll just make sure that you don't get to run in the background. So there is a game of cat and mouse you play. Then there are some other apps which actually leverage things like location access. If you start requesting for location access, you can run in the background for longer. I remember Google Photos doing this at some point. We are not doing it because we don't really want to know your location. So it's a bit hard to explain to the user why you want to do this.
Yeah, right.
So
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there are other like UX hacks. Like for example, we ship this feature called widgets, wherein you can have home screen widgets, which will automatically show you memories from the past or like your favorite people. And what this does is that you actually end up opening the app more frequently, just to tap the photos. And then we send you more notifications every day. You get a notification, hey, like 3 years ago this happened, and you might want to check that out. So yeah, I mean, these are kind of ways of working around it. But for most practical purposes, even on iOS, you don't really realize that there are limitations. Things kind of just back up in the background. The initial import is a little tricky because you might have like hundreds of GBs of data which you need to pull.
Yeah.
So letting that happen on the iPhone is tricky. So there we have a screen where you click a toggle and that kind of keeps the device awake. So that initial import is a bit of a mess on iPhones. On Android, it doesn't really matter.
And I think I remember you saying from another interview you did that sometimes you recommend that people use the desktop app version to get some processing done, including some of the AI processing done, because it's just faster and there's more processing power, and it has actually probably less restrictions on things like being able to operate in the background, it sounds like. So is that like a solution too? Like actually my photo library primarily lives on my Macintosh, not on my phone. Like my phone has a subset of my pictures, all the recent ones plus ones I want to keep around to show people. But like my full library exists on my Mac. So like if I were doing this, I would think I'd probably have it start by pulling it from my Mac and bootstrap my Ente library from there.
Yeah, that totally makes sense because the initial part of upload itself gets solved once you're importing stuff from desktop. The second bit is the other goodies that we give you, like face recognition, search, generating these embeddings. It's a bit expensive in terms of compute. So if you're importing from your Mac, like your Mac is a lot more powerful and less restrained, like you said. So the machine learning just runs significantly faster. You don't even realize the fact that all of this is happening on your device. And then the mobile device syncs all of these, right? It actually has access to all of this information, so it doesn't have to index anything again. So it will kind of just magically start working on other devices.
Gotcha. So Apple, for a long time, allowed you to store your photos in the cloud, but it was not encrypted. They encrypted a lot of the things, but like you said, it was at rest. And then in the, what, it was 2 years ago, maybe, they came around with advanced data protection. And advanced data protection basically closed that gap and finally had end-to-end encryption for not everything, but like it doesn't do contacts, email, and calendars, I think are the main ones, because they have a lot of public interfaces that are hard to do end-to-end encrypted with other services. But they do photos. So given that from a purely security and privacy standpoint, is there really a difference between what Ente does with photos and what Apple can do with advanced data protection?
There are some differences, like even with advanced data protection, when you share photos, it actually breaks into an encryption on Apple. Like whenever you generate those URLs, when you have to share links to other folks. Whereas in Ente, those links stay into an encrypted. And even in terms of features, there are a lot of features that actually break once you enable ADP because the product is not built from that primitives ground up. Whereas with Ente, you will end up feeling like it's more feature rich with end-to-end encryption because this is a constraint that we started playing the game with. So like you will still get all of the goodies and there is no feature that will go away because you've enabled end-to-end encryption because there is no enable disable switch for us. It's just by default end-to-end encrypted.
Now, is that when you say that when you start sharing photos with an Apple, even with ADP, it's broken? Is that if you are sharing it with other Apple people who also have ADP, is it still broken, or is it only if you're trying to share it with people who either don't have ADP to turn on or are not Apple, like you're sending them a share link?
Yeah, so I'm not sure about the ADP bit, but otherwise definitely it breaks into an encryption, like the sharing link bit, right? And it is technically possible, right? So we have album links which are shareable with end-to-end encryption, and you can like collect photos from this. Like at the end of the party, there are folks who share these links, and other folks can contribute their photos to that album. They don't need an account, but if this still says end-to-end encrypted, so it's technically possible, but not on Apple as of now.
So if I already have a whole bunch of pictures within Google Photos or Apple Photos, how hard is it to transfer? I assume the photos is probably not hard, but when you go to import from one to the other, does it also pull albums and people info? Like, because Apple has facial recognition built in, and I don't know if those are profiles that are actually in some format you could use, but can you pull over that kind of metadata as well? I remember I heard you say, I think it was in the Techler interview, that Google actually forbids developers from using their photo APIs for a competing service, so making this a little more difficult. So tell us about that process.
So Google actually makes it very difficult for you to get your data out. Like, and in short, the process is you have to go to this website, takeout.google.com, and you pick Google Photos. Then it throws a bunch of zip files at you after like a couple of hours. And like if you have like 100 GB library, you are left with maybe like 5-10 zip files. Now you have to merge all of the zip files, and your files are kind of split apart across these zip files. And what they do is they actually mangle your metadata as well. So if there is EXIF information, like when the photo was clicked or where it was clicked, that's in a JSON file. And now some of these photos are compressed because you at some point opted in for high quality images instead of original quality, right? And so the whole thing is a mess. It's ridiculous actually, because what we have had to do is, in terms of engineering, if you throw this entire zip file back at us, we patch all of this information back up and we kind of merge it into the store to Ente. Now, we can do that, right? But now, if my dad were to actually try and get his data out just for himself to keep, like he can't make sense out of these JSON files. And like them breaking access to that API, I feel is just malice because it's not incompetence, right? There is already something out there. I mean, I can understand why they might not go out of their way to make exports easier because they don't get promoted for it, right? In general, in Google, there is this culture of promo-driven development wherein you only do things if you're going to be eligible for a promo. So otherwise, there's no point working on something, right? Like, so I can understand that. But when you actually have APIs out there and it's just breaking it, it's just malice at that point.
Yeah.
And
on
that front, Apple is easier, right? It's actually better. Like, so if you install Ente on your iPhone, we'll actually pull your photos from iCloud and start uploading it in the background. The background thing is a bit of a mess, but otherwise, in terms of portability, Apple is much better. And even Apple Photos on Mac actually has a decent export tool. They don't give you extra information like the people information that you mentioned, right? And I think it is perhaps because there is no standardized way to relay this information. Like, I mean, they could say, even Ente, for example, could say, hey, these are the people who are in these photos, and these are the bounding boxes wherein they exist within those photos. But it's might not be in a way which is super consumable for most consumers.
Yeah, I was curious about that because I was wondering if this facial recognition stuff has gotten pretty popular and it's built into a lot of apps that have photos or pictures in them. I was wondering if they'd come to the point where it's so common now that they've developed interoperability standards like that for this kind of things? It sounds like they haven't yet.
Right, because if you look at how the data is represented, see, there is, let's say there is a photo and there is a face in the photo, there is an embedding corresponding to that face now. And then now we have a cluster for these embeddings. And then you might be giving manual feedback saying, hey, is this Vishnu, like across two devices? And then you merge those clusters. So the whole data structure that we have at Ente, I mean, that is open source, that's public, but it might be different for what Apple, like how Apple might be treating it. So yeah, I don't think there is a universal format or even there is an open format. I think what we have might be the closest to an open format. So if anyone is interested, if anyone listening is interested, you can check it out at ente.io/ml. We have this whole details of like how we go about running machine learning on your phones and how we store this data.
Actually, I've never tried this. I wonder if there's like, if you approach the IETF or the W3C or some of the standards bodies, if they would be open to looking at your example and taking that, because it's obviously, it works, you're using it, right. And I would think that would carry a lot more weight than someone saying, yeah, maybe we should do a JSON thing and maybe it looks like this, and you guys are like, no, we've done it, it works, this is how it, I would think that would carry a little more weight with them. Interesting. Okay, so if I ever decided I want to leave Ente for whatever reason, let's go the other way, basically. How can I move or export my data? What format do you create? Hopefully something a little more portable and easier to ingest than what Google does. Mm-hmm. Is that standardized? Could I go the other way if I wanted to? For some reason, I wanted to go back to Apple Photos, or somebody else comes out with some new app. How hard would it be to do that with Ente data?
So on Ente, we actually made this very simple. It's a single click for the desktop app. And we had launched a desktop app with our first version of the product, this we launched 4 years ago. And this feature of a single click export was part of the MVP because it was personally very important to me, because I was traumatized with what had happened with my data at Google. So on a desktop app, it's a single click and it actually does incremental exports. So it's not like you have to export the whole data again. It knows what the last checkpoint was and it will just keep exporting what is left.
Oh, nice.
And there is also a toggle to export things continuously. So it'll, whenever the app starts up, you don't really have to click any button. It'll just keep exporting your newer photos to a location of your choice.
Oh, wow.
And we also have a command line interface where it's again a single command. It's like Ente export, and you can just point it to a folder and it'll again do an incremental export, and you can run it at a frequency you wish, again to take incremental backup search. And now you can store all of this in a hard disk or sync this with a different cloud provider or basically do anything that you wish. So exports are easy, and in terms of formats, you get exactly what you uploaded. We preserve every byte as it is. So the photos or videos just kind of get returned exactly as it is within the same albums. Now, for information that is added within Ente, for example, if you add a note to a photo to an Ente, to a photo on Ente, then they get exported to a JSON file. That bit is a bit trickier, right? And similarly, how we discussed about faces, because there is no data structure to actually best represent the information. So we do want to figure something out, because if nothing else, unlike Apple, we already have a visual tool to browse, right? You can just self-host an instance and point that at the folder, and they could actually give you a visual tool to get access to photos again. So we don't have that feature yet, but the intent is to definitely provide that.
We've been talking about photos a lot here, but actually one of the things that I personally promote about Ente Auth is the same capability with your seed codes, because I used Google Authenticator first because that was one of the most popular ones, and they didn't back it up and they didn't export them out. So as soon as Authy came around, I went to Authy because I like that was a lot better. At least it's synchronized, and there was a way to back it up in case you lost your authentication device, you dropped it in the water or whatever. So I thought that was important, but yet you still can't, even with Authy, unless they've changed it recently, you can't export your seed codes from Authy. Again, it's a walled garden kind of thing. They want to keep you with them, right?
Right.
But I know for a fact that Ente Auth has that capability, correct?
Right. The Authy thing is funny because I think it's a violation of GDPR. So I don't know how they're getting away with it. So with Ente, we have two options. We actually have multiple options. One is that you can export this in plain text, and we just return a list of OTP auth URLs, which is very widely supported format. Or you could get an encrypted backup out of your this thing, wherein you can use a standalone CLI to decrypt it. So it's not like it's tied to Ente in any way. It's an open format and you can kind of decrypt it. And the third option we'd added a couple of months back was a single HTML page with all the QR codes. So if there is an app,
that's great.
So you can just scan those QR codes one by one so that you can port them into a different app. And right now, actually, we're working on an automated export system wherein you don't have to manually export, so that you can just configure that every time I open the app, just automatically push it to this folder. Hopefully, it'll be available sometime next month.
Well, that's fantastic. And I think that segues perfectly into my next question and that is having a backup of your photos is really important. Like, unlike a lot of other file types that you might, scan documents or whatever, you could go back if you had the originals and scan them again, or maybe you could download some of these things again from the internet if they're for your own personal files, but you can't reproduce old photos. I mean, they happened once in time and they're never going to happen again. So it's really important that you have backups for these things. And I understand that with a cloud synchronized app, you kind of have a backup in the sense that all your devices have copies, the cloud has a copy. But let's say the syncing gets out of whack and decides to delete the same image from everywhere because it syncs and that's what it's supposed to do. It's gone everywhere. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like your export capability, especially your automated incremental export capability, could be used as a backup mechanism. If I put that into a folder in a Dropbox or iCloud or someplace that's automatically backed up, that would be a backup, right?
Right. So in general, we are kind of very paranoid as engineers, because this is like the place where I'm keeping my photos, right? So we already keep 3 copies of your data. So like we have 3 different data centers. So every photo that gets uploaded gets, like, there are 3 copies made and they get stored in 3 these places. One of them is in an underground fallout shelter in Paris. But so that's what Ente does for you, right? But apart from that, we do think it's important for you to keep your own photos, like have your own local copy, just for, if nothing else, like personal like sanity, right? Like I think it's just nice to have. So which is why we have those features, like both of the CLI. The CLI is built just for this thing, so that, for example, a lot of folks have run VBASes or like servers where they don't really have a GUI, like they can't use a desktop app. So then they can just like write a cron to use the CLI to incrementally export your data. It's pretty trivial.
That's fantastic. Okay, so you've talked a little bit about AI on the device as well. You've got some facial recognition. You've got some other things. I think I think you said you were working on the capability of, I want to search on red barns, or I want to search on pictures of dogs or things like that, which is a semantic search, I think is what you called it.
Okay.
You also make a point of using the AI that's available on device for privacy purposes. So, which is fantastic. But how limiting is that in terms of like processing capability? Do iOS and Android provide AI tools that you need, or have you had to leverage third-party AI tools to do this? And then if so, how can you be sure that these third-party tools aren't using my data to train their models?
Okay, so AI is now a loaded word. It's kind of like how crypto was at some point, right? Or perhaps less.
Yes.
So I'll separate like the technology from the marketing slop, right? So because the technology does provide value, right? Like, and the underlying technology in this context is machine learning, and machine learning is incredibly useful in the context of photos. Like there is this whole anti-AI movement, but at the same time, it's like what machine learning provides on top of photos is very, very useful, is what I feel, because it kind of helps you go back in time and relive memories. And I think as human beings, I don't think we're programmed to be very grateful. And I feel like when you combine machine learning with photos, you can kind of fix that bug to a certain extent. Kind of reminds you that, dude, there are things that have happened in your life which you ought to be grateful for. So that's a value right now. The problem with this is, like you mentioned, it's privacy, right? I think we've been conditioned to a point wherein we just dump all of our data to a third-party server wherein they run their machine learning, they train their models. And it's a huge win for these companies. Like if you think about it, I think Google's best win over the next decade is actually going to be Google Photos, because they have access to a data set that no one else has, like not OpenAI, not Microsoft. And if the world's best vision model is going to come out of somewhere, it's going to be Google. And now then the kind of brings up the question again, like why are we giving up our data for this? So when I started Ente, it was a technical experiment for myself to prove that, hey, you don't really have to give up your data to get these features, that we can actually have machine learning running locally on devices, so that you can still have the best of both worlds. You can get like really good features, but without sacrificing your privacy. And okay, it's in terms of engineering, you're asking how viable it is. So there are multiple aspects to this. I think the tooling is currently very poor. It's not about Android or iOS as platforms, but there are no frameworks which run on mobile right now, because a lot of machine learning frameworks are in Python, and you just like import something and you just do run that code. That doesn't really happen on mobile or even on web or desktop. So I mean, desktop, yes, but at least not on web. So we had to re-implement these libraries in Dart and JavaScript and everywhere else. And this was the pre-LLM days. So we actually had to write all of this code. It's not like we were generating this code. So that bit was hard. So now we've got the frameworks, and the second part is the models. The great thing is that we actually have open source models, both for face recognition, for alignment, for semantic search. Semantic search is the one, like again, like girl in a yellow dress, playing with a dog at the beach, like very long queries. And the good thing is that these models are getting smaller and better over a period of time. So by having ported these frameworks, we're now able to run these models on device. So your data really does not leave your device. There is no third party involved, and no one is running over your data. So that's how we are playing the game right now. Apple has taken a slightly different approach to this, which also kind of works, which is what they call private cloud compute. And the win there is that, see, at the end of the day, the data is going to a server in an unencrypted way, but they are claiming it will be stateless, so they don't really store the data, nor are they logging any information. And the promise is that no Apple employees can actually connect to these machines and get the data. And there is this other bit I think they do wherein they call it request anonymization, wherein like you don't really know which user has sent what request. So, but my fundamental problem with Apple's approach to this is that none of this is open source. So it's an elaborate, trust me, bro, situation right there, right? But
Yeah.
so I'll come back to that again, Ken Thompson paper, right? I think it's important to like trust people on some level. So I kind of do trust Apple, but more transparency would have really nailed it in for me as an engineer, right? And that is what Ente plans to do in the long run, because like all of that I discussed in terms of running on device is possible because these models are small, like face recognition models are small, search models are small, but there are certain models for features like segmentation. Like segmentation is where you, for example, blur out your background or like move things around. These are massive models, so it's not possible to run them on device, at least not right now. So for those models, we would want to have our own version of an open source private cloud compute, and yeah, well, that's the plan.
Okay. Well, again, kind of harping again on the third-party library thing. Most apps today are built on top of third-party libraries and software development kits. I mean, because no one wants to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of things that have already been done and done well, and maybe there's even 5 different versions of those. You could pick one you like. I'm a software developer. I understand that. But how can you as a developer know whether or not those third-party libraries are harvesting your data? I mean, if you put them on your device, you could do outgoing firewall stuff to kind of look and see if they're trying to talk to something that you weren't aware of, but that's tedious, and a lot of people don't do that. So how do you, as a software developer, must at some point have to rely on some third-party stuff? How do you prevent these libraries from mining my data or communicating with servers, or do you test for that? How can you even find out if they're doing it? Can you search their code for network calls maybe? How do you do that?
So technically, yes, it's possible to search for network calls, and then there are these third-party apps like Exodus. I think it's called Exodus, which kind of monitor for outgoing connections, and they let you know if there are like weird requests being made. I think our fundamental approach is to just say no to dependencies. Like we're very averse to increasing our dependencies because it actually increases the surface area for vulnerabilities, if nothing else, right? And if there is a issue in the underlying library, at the end of the day, you are responsible as the person who serves that like product, right? So, and supply chain attacks are the hardest to fight against. Like I think last year there was the whole XE drama, and that's an example. So one thing we do is just minimize dependencies as much as possible, and we do monitor for updates. We're very careful when we actually upgrade libraries. And there is GitHub, for example, like has that, I forgot what the extension is called now, but basically with depend upon, I think, alerts, wherein they tell you when there are critical security alerts, and only when there is an absolute need do we actually upgrade these dependencies. And then it kind of comes back to the initial thing about trusting intent, like trusting people, trusting humanity, because it's not feasible to kind of go through all of the underlying code. And like there are a lot of these folks, because we are in the intersection of open source and privacy, we end up interacting with a lot of folks who are very hardcore and who have very strong belief systems, right? But at the same time, they don't really know if a chip that is made in China, like what it's doing within their device. Right? So they'll kind of have this very hard battle against like Ente for doing something, and at the same time they're running this chip which is manufactured God knows where like you really don't know what's happening. So I think it kind of comes down to that, like where you kind of there is a level of trust involved. And it's interesting that you mentioned about like searching code, right? I think this is one area where LLMs could actually be legitimately useful, like wherein you could actually like tell Claude or whatever that is to kind of just scan the library and make sure that it's not doing anything malicious. So I'm sure, I don't think it is really picked up, it's just something I thought of like while you were talking, but I'm guessing that will come down the lane.
Well, and I know that some source code library repositories and people that host them are starting to add automatic AI checking for code that's doing weird things. And I know that, like, for instance, when you submit your apps to Google and Apple, they have automated processes that look for suspicious activity. I think we're getting to the point where we can be using AI tools like that to look for third-party libraries and try to pick out anything that looks suspicious to let you know. So that's great, and I agree. And that's another great use for AI. It's perfect for that use case. All right, so this one's kind of tough. And, some countries are trying to pass laws allowing local law enforcement to access cloud data. We had the crypto wars back in the 90s. We kind of hoped we won them back then, but we didn't. It keeps coming back around. And law enforcement, think of the children, think of the worst possible, the four horsemen of the infocalypse, I think is what they call them, drug dealers, kid rapists, or whatever, anyway, what I'm talking about, all these, think of these horrible, the worst case scenarios. So therefore, we need access to these people's data because we need to stop crime. And so there's a lot of countries that are saying, look, you need to give us some sort of privileged access to this encrypted stuff. We've had this fight in the U.S., we've had it in the UK, Australia, and it's been all over the place, and it's driving me crazy. But like Signal, when Signal's been confronted with this, or Apple, to their credit, in a lot of these cases, they said, okay, well, we're just either not going to have that feature in your country, we're not going to break it. So if you like advanced data protection in the UK, they said, well, we just won't do it. Now, thankfully, recently they just got backed off of that, or the UK just backed off that position. But Signal is like, well, if you're going to tell us you have to have a backdoor, then we just won't operate in your country. So here's the hard part. What are you going to do when they come knocking at your door and say the same thing? What's your position on that? Do you disable encryption for them, or do you just say we're not going to operate in your country?
We can't operate in the country because there is no option to disable encryption in Ente. It's by default it will encrypt it, so it will be closer to what Signal has done, where we'll just have to back out of UK. And I think this is not specific to UK. I think it could be UK today, it could be EU tomorrow, because governments and politicians, I think, are in general always against privacy because they have a vested interest to know as much about as much as possible about their citizens, right? So for us, the long term idea is to actually to kind of go back, to come full circle and to go back to where we started, which is hardware. Because if you actually have a box that's physically yours to own, Ente servers at that point are reduced to offsite backups or just sync servers. And at that point, it doesn't really matter what the government is saying. It's a physical hardware box that you own, right? If you want to break into your apartment and take it, that's not Ente's problem. I mean, that's your thing. So that we believe is where things are headed, and that's kind of how we are looking at building the company in the long run, so that it's the servers in itself are kind of redundant in the sense, and you actually physically own your data.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, but that's got to be tough. I mean, when an entire market gets taken away or won't comply with those kind of laws, and I'm glad you just, you're saying that's the way you're going to go. I think that's the right call. It's got to be difficult. I wish countries would stop putting companies in that position. It doesn't make sense.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you, and it's just that we're very prepared for these situations, and because since we started off as a hardware company, we think if we go back there, it'll actually be easier than how it was when we started off, because at least there are enough people who know us. We don't really need VC money at this point. It is solved a bunch of problems that we had 5 years back, where no one knew us. Now at least we know the first 1,000 folks who would actually buy the piece of hardware. So the game will be a little easier at this point. But yeah, let's see.
And if I was an Ente user in the UK and I got to really like it, and then all of a sudden I couldn't use the software, but I had this out where I could buy the hardware, then yeah, that might drive me to buy the hardware.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. One main last question, and I want to ask this specifically because I know you've got another product you're working on that I think will meet this need. Because I know one of the reasons, because you said one of the interviews that the one reason, and you said today, one of the reasons you wanted to create Ente was so you could pass this on to your kids. These photos are family heirlooms, and you want these to stay in the family. And so we've talked a lot about privacy and security from your perspective and how only you can see that your photos, but you also want to share them with family and not necessarily while you're still living. So I know you have a built-in mechanism for allowing someone else to assume control of your Ente account. So talk to me about how the legacy aspects of Ente Photos work.
All right. So this is again come from a very personal use case that I want my wife to have access to my photos when I'm not around. So the idea is that you can go to settings and you can just assign a trusted contact, and you can put in your partner's email address or your kid's email address. And then what they can do is they can request access at a particular point in time. And if you don't respond within, say, 30 days, then they get to reset your password and take over your account. And all of this again stays end-to-end encrypted. So the idea is that they can just take over your account at some point.
That is fantastic. I'm starting to see other products adopt this same basic philosophy. A lot of password managers now have that too, which is fantastic. There's this legacy notion of defining somebody that can, kind of like a dead man switch, they can request access, and if you're still around and you want to say no, I'm not dead yet, you can say no.
Right.
But if you don't respond in a certain amount of time, then we can, you want them to assume control of the account, and you won't lose it that way, which is fantastic. And I think we should do that more. I'm curious though, do you have any kind of a notion of, and I kind of wish this was also something that's going to be adopted by some of these services, is I maybe only want a subset of my data to fall to legacy hands. Is there a notion of saying they get access to everything but this?
Not right now, but this is on our roadmap and this is already supported by our architecture, because we also find value in this, right? There is perhaps certain kind of albums that I want my daughter to have and something else where I want my wife to have. So yeah, the intent is to eventually add support for this.
That'd be fantastic. All right, well, that was great. One last question. This is an easy one. What's next for Ente? Do you have any big features or any new products on the horizon? What's on your roadmap?
Right. So we do have one big product that we're working on. We're calling it Locker, where it's an app to store and share and pass down like documents and other critical information, like stuff that's outside of photos. And this is not really a Drive app. It's not like for syncing your entire laptop or anything of the sort, but it's for maybe like the 100 documents that are actually very important to you. And so again, so this is a very focused app to make sure or to serve the use case of making sure that like my wife and daughter get some critical documents, like could be tax, could be investments, could be certificates, and or other information like information about documents in the real world, like where they are and like how to use them, and what my account credentials are, or like people that you should be talking to take specific bits of my life to closure. So from a posterity perspective, these are so we try to figure out ways to stay away from the Drive category, because we think that that's kind of an overcrowded space. But we do think that the product I'm talking about, it doesn't really have a category right now, but we think it's important for this use case to be served. So we're working on that, and it's like in this built on top of the current primitive for legacy in terms of passing down stuff and in terms of sharing. So in fact, there are no server-side changes for building this product. It's just a different skin on top of the same architecture. So that is being built as a new product. In terms of existing products, all this is continuing to be maintained. It's in some sense feature complete, but we have recently hired one full-time engineer just so that things kind of keep moving forward in some sense. Then for photos, there's a lot planned, because again, it's a flagship product. So there is a lot that we are also looking forward to. That there is the intelligence angle wherein we're building a bunch of features which can detect like similar images and kind of stack them on top, or like you can cull through them, so that, because I think these days whenever you click a photo, you don't just click a single photo, you click a bunch of photos and then you have to pick out the best. And then again, we're using this intelligence to figure out how to surface better memories. Like we know which people are there in your photos, where they are, and you have semantic search, and like basically how can we provide more joy out of your photos. So that's one focus area. And then there is sharing in general, because with this photo sharing is still broken. That sounds like a very tech pro thing to say, but I still come back to like Signal or WhatsApp to share photos with family. So the closed loop sharing I still think is broken. Like I thought like 10 years back maybe Instagram would fix it, but it's kind of gone somewhere else altogether. Like there's no way I'm putting my kid's photo on Insta. So we've tried to figure out ways to kind of enable like single tap sharing for photos and a feed where you can view these photos, and it's a very close-knit circle. It's not a place where you can really get dopamine from. There's no concept of likes or reaction, but it's
right.
Maybe more oxytocin than dopamine. It's for a very close ones. So
yeah.
So these are some of the things that we're working on right now.
How many people are at Ente right now, and do you plan or think you need to grow?
So there are 14 of us right now. There'll be 16 of us in October. We've growing very carefully because we're kind of the bootstrap, we're running on subscription revenue, and I do think we'll have to keep growing for a little while longer. I don't know for how long, but I do think at this point there's a lot more we could be doing where we're just constrained by bandwidth. Like there are things that we know we should be doing and like this have already been done, but and now there's a balancing act in terms of pissing off customers who are like, dude, where is this feature, versus letting them know that, hey, like we don't really want to burn money and do unsustainable things. So that just please be patient, give us time. So yeah, it's a balancing act. Right now we've been very conservative in terms of how we're building the company, because there's a risk of things kind of just falling apart if we're too aggressive. And in general, I'm a very risk-averse person. So coming back to the question, yes, we do have to grow a little more, or maybe a lot more. I'm not very sure, but we definitely have to grow. But I also don't think we're trying to build a massive company in terms of people. I don't think we need like 10,000 engineers. to build a great product company or to actually build a great company. And just recently, I was looking at this list of companies that have grown over 100 years, like that have been around for like multiple centuries. And an interesting thing was that like majority of them had like less than 300 people in it. So I think it's possible to build companies that can last multiple generations without like being massive. And maybe that's the path we'll take.
Well, thank you for doing it, because we need more products like this, and I love the philosophy that you've adopted for this, and I wish more companies would do it. So thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks a lot.
All right, there we go. Thanks again to Vishnu for coming on the show. That was a fun talk. And again, I really have a very high appreciation for the kind of care that Vishnu and his team has put into creating this truly private by design software. And I love that it's so personal to him. And I think that I'm sure those things are not unrelated. So check it out. Go to ente.io. You'll find the products there. If you want the Auth app, you can go to ent.io/auth. I have been wanting to move to that for a long time now. I've used Authy for a long time for my two-factor authentication codes. I have printed out all my QR codes so I can easily transfer them to Authy, and I'm in the process of doing that now. Ente is really cool, and I'm looking forward to moving all of my stuff over there. Vishnu did talk about their machine learning stuff, and that was at their website /ML for machine learning. All these links are in the show notes, by the way. Also, I'm really kind of interested in the whole export option from Ente on backing up your codes to an HTML file or something. I haven't had a chance to get that far to try it, but if I have something interesting to report on that, I will circle back to that at some point. Okay, so the patrons on Thursday morning will get the bonus Q&A as usual. We didn't talk too long, but we covered a couple other topics. We talk a little bit about the best way to self-host Ente Photos if you want to try to do that yourself. And we actually talked about how you might move your two-factor authentication code seeds. Like when you scan a QR code to set one of those accounts up, that's a seed code that is saved off into the application. And a lot of these applications don't have good, clean ways for you to get those back out of there. Again, it's the Roach Motel thing. But we do talk about that and what some options are there. So patrons will get that bonus Q&A content as usual on Thursday morning. Okay, so next week we will not have a news show. As I said last week, I'm on vacation, and so I decided that the best way to handle that would be to do 3 interview shows in a row, because I've got so many interviews recorded that I've got extras. So next week we'll be talking with Paul Roberts. He is the founder of the Secure Resilient Future Foundation, and we're going to talk about the security of IoT-type devices. He was actually on a panel discussion, I think it was at B-Sides this year, B-Sides in Las Vegas, with Stacy Higginbotham, who I talked with last year about software tethering. And then after that interview, we will be hearing from Jake Braun, who used to work at the White House in cybersecurity. And we're going to be talking about his project called DEF CON Franklin, which he co-founded with Jeff Moss, who is the person who started DEF CON, to try to help our local and particularly rural water facilities improve their security as part of our critical U.S. infrastructure. So 2 more interviews coming up, and then we'll get back to a new show. All right, take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next time, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.